Sometimes it takes a little bit of pain to heal properly. That's what a lot of this week is about. But we also get a pretty big sudden insight of clarity and a mental breakthrough that I'm really looking forward to this week. And Sunday has a lot going on as well, so make sure you stick around all the way to Sunday. My name is Cam White. If you don't know me already, welcome back to the Astrology Report, this time for May 27th through June 2nd of 2024. Let's get started talking about this week. So we don't have a lot going on this week, which I think is going to be good because next week has an insane amount of things going on. But this week does have a couple of really important transits. So we start off on Monday with the moon in Capricorn, making a trine to Uranus, and then eventually making a sextile to Neptune. The moon will then ingress into Aquarius. It will then trine Jupiter and conjoin Pluto. So I always just talk about the moon in Capricorn. It's just really good to kind of detach, get some work done. You know, there's like no hard feelings with the moon in Capricorn. It's like just kind of a suck it up kind of a day. And the moon making a trine to Uranus is, I think, allowing for at least some sort of spontaneity, some sort of, you know, I keep using the word breakthrough. Uranus is really good for liberation and freedom and all of the exciting things. I think while the moon's in Capricorn trining Uranus, like there is that access to that again, kind of breakthrough feeling. But when the moon's in Capricorn, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like that wasn't that big of a deal. Or like, oh yeah, that was cool, but that wasn't the most exciting thing ever. And then as the moon makes a sextile to Neptune, there is this kind of, you know, looking at the situation maybe through a foggy lens or maybe having a little bit of creative insight as to how you could see the situation. But really, I think the energy changes on Monday when the moon ingresses into Aquarius because the moon will then trine Jupiter and conjoin Pluto. Now, what I find really interesting about Monday here is this is, I believe this is the moon's first aspect to Jupiter now that Jupiter's in Gemini. And we have all of this air stuff going on. We have the sun in Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini, Venus in Gemini, and the moon in Aquarius connecting all of these dots. And so when the moon goes into Aquarius, our emotions are a little bit more connected to like society, our networks, our groups, technology, things like that. And I think while the moon trines Jupiter, there's something exciting about this. There's some sort of new information that can get you hyped up. There's some sort of, experiment that can get you hyped up. The people that you're surrounded with, the people that you're connecting to, there's some sort of hype over information here. But then the moon conjoins Pluto. And I think that really becomes this situation where, there's a lot of new information and there can be kind of this analysis paralysis or this kind of fear of like how to maybe integrate yourself with it. I think a lot about, whether that was 2020 or, you can kind of name any sort of politically divisive situation that this country or the world has gone through in the past couple of years. I mean, especially the thing going on right now in the Middle East. And I'm using censored words here because I'm trying to protect my YouTube channel a little bit better. But it's just one of those things where not everyone agrees on every single situation. Like where you and a group of people might agree with one thing, something else comes up, and then you disagree. And there's kind of this fear around how you manage those social situations. And that's how I almost look at the moon conjoining Pluto after the moon trines Jupiter. It's kind of like, whoa, hey, there's this new information, there's this new situation, and now I have this kind of like fear or this kind of like, paranoia, I think maybe is too extreme of a word around people. But, and it's the same thing with ideas, or it's the same thing with information, or the same thing with technology. There's this kind of like, whoa, okay, what's kind of going on here? Now, the flip side of Pluto is about like empowerment. It is about like kind of like taking that, and writing it. I think as the moon trines the moon trines Jupiter and conjoins Pluto, there is this access to like, hey, this new information like might actually lead you to feeling more empowered, feeling more in charge, feeling like you can do the things that you want to. I talked about this last week with Jupiter and Gemini because a lot of people got butthurt when I said, oh, Jupiter's in detriment. And people are like, no, it's going to be the best. And it's just like, what's cool about Jupiter and Gemini is you might find out your beliefs are wrong. And a lot of us have very shitty beliefs, whether that's because we think we're not worthy enough or we can't be successful or whatever it is. You might be in a situation where that you learn that belief doesn't actually work. It doesn't actually make any sense. And so I look at that moon trining Jupiter as like there might be this connection to new information that makes you question your beliefs, that makes you question your worldview, that makes you question your faith. And there's a lot of curiosity with Jupiter and Gemini, like learning a lot of information. But I think there's some sort of access to that makes you kind of question things a little bit. And when the moon conjoins Pluto, there's this little bit of like a, holy shit, like I never thought of it that way. Like, how much more does that empower me, or does that give me access to more power? And, when I say power, I don't mean just like, feel the power and, go all crazy with it. But anytime we can have access to that stuff, that helps us a lot of the time, because oftentimes we just feel disempowered with our situation or life, or feel like we can't, when in reality we can kind of do whatever we want. It's just a matter of like how our own framework of our beliefs get in our own way. So then we get into Tuesday, and even though there's not a lot going on Tuesday, I really like Tuesday because the moon will just still be in Aquarius. It's going to make a trine to Venus, and it trines the sun. I don't typically talk about the moon making aspects to the sun, but what I think is nice here is the sun's in Gemini, Venus is in Gemini, Jupiter's in Gemini. There's all this kind of stimulation and information, and Venus and Jupiter and Gemini just reminds me of like going to a wedding and you're seeing all these family members and these friends that you haven't seen in a long time, and you're shooting the shit and being like, oh my God, I haven't seen you since high school or whatever. There's a lot of this kind of like, fun connection with people. And the moon in Aquarius is just kind of like adding on to that. So the moon being in Aquarius, just connecting more with groups of people. It's the same thing of like, when I used to DJ weddings for a living. I DJed like 300 weddings. What's fun about group dynamics is when it came for me DJing weddings, oftentimes, my job is literally to get people to dance, right? And it really only takes one or two people to hit that dance floor, and then everyone comes on. What we used to do is we actually, by the way, ladies, if you're getting married, hire a good DJ. It will make or break your wedding. But one of the things we used to do was called the, what would you call it? Like secret DJ photo trick. And so what we would do is after we did dinner, after we did toast, after we did the first dances, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, the bride and the groom, they want to remember all of your beautiful, big, bright, smiling faces today. So I want to get everyone on the dance floor for a big group photo. The photographer didn't know about this, but essentially, I just told them, hey, go along with this for me real quick. And the bride and groom really didn't care about a group photo, but it ends up being cool anyway. So I got everyone on the dance floor for a group photo. I have them take a picture, and on that, we do a nice picture, we do a silly photo. And then after that silly photo, I just hit like Uptown Funk or something dumb like that. And you kill the lights, you turn on the music, and everyone just starts dancing. You're just there, you're connected. And even if people we're like, oh, I'm not going to dance. Well, they're already on the dance floor. Everyone's dancing around them. You might as well dance. And so that's how I kind of look at Tuesday is again, there's this kind of connection to a lot of people having a lot of fun. I think Tuesday, even though there's really nothing going on, I think it's still just a nice day to enjoy. So then we get to Wednesday, and on Wednesday, the moon will still be in Aquarius. It's going to square Mercury. It will then sextile Mars. It will then square Uranus. Then it ingresses into Pisces and squares Jupiter. But the highlight that we have is Mars conjoining Chiron. And this is why I kind of opened up the video with, it kind of hurts to heal a little bit. But let's talk about the moon real fast. The moon, while it's in Aquarius, is going to make a square to Mercury. And the moon in Aquarius squaring Mercury and Taurus is just, our ideas, and maybe we're I think of fixed signs, right? Like Taurus and Aquarius are fixed signs. They're really, you ever try to change an Aquarius's mind or try to tell a Taurus to change their mind? They're very, very stubborn people. And those are good qualities to have. It's just kind of like there are situations, though, where it is harder to deal with. And the moon in Aquarius making that square to Mercury is kind of like this frustration with communication. It's one of those things where, let's say it's hard for me to not bring up political situations because it's just so easy at the moment. I don't want to mention any, but because you could just insert whatever political situation you want here. The moon in Aquarius is like, oh, you don't think this is the moral and justified way? And Mercury and Taurus is like, no. They just don't see it that way. And so rather than getting worked up about how you feel about a situation and trying to change someone's mind about it, it's just not going to work. That's how I look at the moon squaring Mercury. Now, if you take that and apply it to your personal life, there is this hey, you might feel this emotional connection to something. You might feel more of hey, these are my ideas. This is what I want to do. But Mercury is kind of again, it's your mind. There's this immovable part of your mind at the moment. Mercury and Taurus is more focused again on value, on stability, on strength. And the moon and Aquarius is so much more of bigger ideas and kind of well, if we just do this, this, and this, and that. And Mercury and Taurus is no, I don't want to do that. Try not to beat yourself up so much here where you're oh, I really want to do this, but my mind's not there. And you're just kind of conflicted. It's just kind of hey, maybe have different, the moon in Aquarius is good for exploring how you feel. But as it squares Mercury, this might be kind of hard to change your mind on a subject. So just kind of be aware of that on Wednesday. The moon makes a sextile to Mars, which I do like for, again, energy, ambition, and that's going to be important for Mars conjoining Chiron, which we're going to talk in a second. But then the moon makes a square to Uranus. This is kind of, again, effing around and finding out. There's this kind of oh, I'm going to play with all these ideas. And again, it reminds me of let's say you're at dinner at a wedding and you're sitting at a table with a bunch of strangers, and then you're just how do we feel about the conflict in the Middle East? Really just flip the table over because you're going to get everyone saying all these other things, which for me, I'm just kind of chaotic neutral. I just think that would be funny in general. But if you don't want to disturb the peace at a dinner table, Don't do that. But the moon squaring Uranus is some sort of like, hey, I want to connect with all of you guys. Let me bring up something that I'm not even thinking at that would be controversial and totally get everyone upset and mad. So then the moon ingresses into Pisces, which is a lot more chill. It is a lot more fun, but it does square Jupiter. And I look at the moon in Pisces squaring Jupiter as like overstimulation. Like, all right, there's too much information now. If you're anything like me, like if you think conspiracy theories are fun or just information is fun, you get to a point where it becomes overwhelming and you don't know what to think or you don't know what to feel and you get a little bit too connected to it. That moon in Pisces squaring Jupiter is just being like, all right, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I'm taking in all of this information. I need to maybe take a step back from things just for a little bit because I feel overwhelmed with this information. But let's talk about Mars conjoining Chiron, which is the highlight on Wednesday. Mars is fights and conflicts. Mars is aggression and action. It's been in Aries for a little while now, and it's conjoining Chiron. We just had a Mercury retrograde over Chiron. We just had an eclipse over Chiron. I really want you to look at the house that Aries rules in your chart, because again, that's where you're going to be able to understand where this is happening in your life. And we have the ruler of the North Node. We have the ruler of Chiron at this moment, which is Mars, because they're in Aries, conjoining Chiron. And there's the way I look at it is it reminds me of like an amputation. An amputation or again, stitches or again, surgery or anything in which incisions or cutting or burning like has to happen in order to heal something. Like the thing is with Chiron, like Chiron is so, like so many people get really into Chiron. And my biggest thing is like, it's not like amazing. Like if you've ever broken a bone, and you've had to have the doctors manipulate it back into place, that sucks. That does not feel good. You've got to do it to fix your bone. Or for example, if you've ever sliced your leg open or sliced some part of your body open and then you're bleeding out and you got to go to the hospital and they got to stitch you up, like it's not fun. It sucks. It really sucks. But that's what you got to do to like, heal that. And that's how I look at Mars conjoining Chiron is like, hey, we just had this Mercury retrograde over here. We just had this whole like mindset shift in terms of like, what are we taking action on? And what are we doing? And, this is kind of painful to do. And like, I know I need to do it. I need to address it because it hurts really bad. And I know this is what's going to take to heal it. And then we had that eclipse, which kind of changed the whole storyline. And then Mars coming in here saying like, okay, this is the moment. This is what we got to do. There's a lot of people that like will break a bone and then they don't go to the hospital and then they like wait a couple days and then it gets worse and worse and worse and then they decided to go to the hospital. That's what you don't want to do, but that's what Mars conjoining Chiron reminds me of is like, hey, here's a situation that you have to address. It's not going to be fun, but it's after this is done, you are going to be better. And I look at Mars conjoining Chiron as like taking that kind of scary step in a direction, or at least having a situation happen to you in which, hey, you had to take some sort of action. You had to deal with something that was maybe difficult to deal with. But at the end of the day, you're going to, and I don't even like using the word healed because so many people in the spiritual world be like, I'm healed and I've fixed all my problems. Like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You did not do that. Like if you did, you would be dead. Because that's really when you kind of solve all your problems. But Mars conjoining Chiron is addressing a huge wound and dealing with it in a way. And again, this is Mars in Aries. Like you're going to the right doctor. You're getting the right treatment. You're getting the right treatment's probably the best way to put it. And you're going to be better after this. But this is going to sting. This is going to hurt. But this is how you take care of yourself. This is the right thing to do. Like a lot of people get scared of going to the hospital when they have like a major injury. And because or same thing with like a dentist. Like I made a dentist analogy last week and some people are like, I hate the dentist. I'm like, yeah, but like if your tooth is like infected and you're in pain, like you gotta go. Otherwise it's going to hurt really, really, really bad. Like you don't get out of the pain until it's fixed. And that's how I just look at Mars conjoining Chiron. And I just think the moon, squaring Mercury and, squaring Uranus and sextiling Mars is kind of like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm resisting. I don't want to do any of this stuff, but like, I'm going to have to anyway. I'm going to have to deal with it. I'm going to have to. It's kind of like, the moon squaring Mercury is like, you're at the hospital and they're like, we're going to put a needle. And you're like, no, I hate needles. And the moon sextiling Mars or the moon squaring Uranus and sextiling Mars just reminds me of, what my stepdad used to do. And same thing with my grandpa. My grandpa was a very, very mean man. I love him to death, but he was just brutal. If I was ever in pain, like, oh, this happened, he'd be like, let me see something real quick. And he'd grab my hand and he'd just like squeeze my pinky like all the way back He called it like milking a mouse. And my stepdad used to do this too. Whenever I'm in pain, and like they'd bring the pain somewhere else, and they'd be like, "Oh, see, your leg doesn't hurt as much anymore, right? Because now you're focused on this." That's what it kind of reminds me of. Is kind of like, hey, let's take your attention off this real quick. We're going to do something completely different, so your mind is a little bit more off of this. That's what that reminds me of. And then the moon going into Pisces and squaring Jupiter while this Mars conjoining Chiron thing happens is, again, it's like, okay, the battle is done here. The hard part of it's done. And now we have just a little bit more. For example, like I've broken a bajillion bones in my body. It's like the second you get surgery or the second you're in the cast, it's like, all right, now physical therapy comes in. Now you have to relearn how to do things. You have to like not move this a little bit. Like I broke my right arm for a long time when I was still in high school, and I had to learn how to write with my left hand. And it didn't get me out of any English. I had an English teacher. His name was Mr. Skousen. He literally looked like what's his face from The Office? Not Ben Stiller. Steve Carell. He looked just like Steve Carell. Like part of me wants to go grab one of my yearbooks to show you, because I mean, it's not like, oh, he kind of does. It's like you would mistake him for Steve Carell. And anyway, he was really mean. And I was like, I broke my arm. I can't write. He was like, figure it out. Write with your left hand. I was like, okay. So that's just what Wednesday reminds me of. And it's going to suck, but I think it's going to be good at the end of the day. And so then we get to Thursday. The moon is going to make a square to Venus while it's in Pisces. Again, overstimulation. You might have had a little bit too many drinks. Like, have you ever like been on a, let's say you're at like a bar. I'm sure 80% of my audience is women. So like some of you might be able to relate to this, but this is a very man moment. Is like, you have like a couple of drinks and you're feeling good. You're feeling confident. But then there's that fine line where you're like, you go to hit on a girl and then you're kind of like, oh wait, I looked like the douchebag in that situation. I did not read that situation clearly. And it's probably because I have a little bit too many drinks. The moon in Pisces squaring Venus and Gemini is very like, you're feeling good, you're a little bit loose, but you kind of, scratch the vinyl a little bit too much on the DJ deck, and it kind of ruined the vibe there. So I look at the moon in Pisces squaring Venus and Gemini as like, hey, like no one to stop, no one it's kind of overstimulation, no one it's a little bit too much there. But the other thing that we have going on Thursday is Mercury conjoining Uranus. And this is why I kind of talked about a mental breakthrough here, because what is nice about Mercury conjoining Uranus is Mercury's about our ideas, our thoughts, the way that we communicate. Uranus is, again, breakthrough, innovation, liberation. We just had Jupiter conjoin it. We just had Venus conjoin it. We just had Venus and Jupiter conjoin each other. Mercury, I think, is kind of like taking all of those things that we just experienced with Uranus and just bringing it to our minds. Like something I've seen a lot about with like the Jupiter Uranus stuff is like stuff that is a little bit more meta, that is a little bit more bigger happens, and it's kind of hard for you to comprehend. And then when Mercury kind of joins the chat, like Mercury is literally like how we connect all of the dots, and just Mercury coming up and hitting Uranus is like, oh shit, like that did happen. Like, wow, this is a little bit different. There's just this opportunity to kind of, again, see your situation differently, or at least understand your situation differently. Again, this is in Taurus. This is related to value, stability, security, having different ideas, being a lot more innovative. Like I know for me right now with Mercury, at least getting closer and closer to Uranus, I'm like, I got this idea. I've got this idea. I want to do this. I want to do that. That's the way I look at Mercury conjoining Uranus. There's some level of like inspirational, like mental ideas that might just be nothing, might just be a lot of ideas, or actually might assist in something very constructive. I think the only negative part of Mercury conjoining Uranus is like, if you're expecting everything to be the same and you're holding on, like you're not going to get that. Like this might be just a sudden message that you weren't expecting that does kind of shake things up a little bit. Again, like roll with the punches in life. Like that's kind of what you have to do. You can't control the tide, but you can control how you ride the waves. That's how I look at Mercury conjoining Uranus in more of a negative way. Like you might get some information that might unlock some things, and that might be a good thing, or it might be a thing in your opinion that is too shocking and too overwhelming that it feels like it creates a lot of instability. That's going to be your job on how you manage that. We get to Friday. The moon will then conjoin Saturn in Pisces. It will then conjoin Neptune later on in the evening. And then it ingresses into Aries super late on Friday night. I think Friday, just the moon conjoining Saturn is literally being like, all right, like we got all of this stimulation going on. Are we going to stay out till 3 a.m. or is it getting like 11 a.m.? And everyone's getting a little bit too drunk and a little bit too excited. And maybe we're feeling a little bit too sensitive and a little bit too overwhelmed. We're getting a little sleepy. That's the moon conjoining Saturn. And then the moon conjoining Neptune is just kind of like, have you ever had a night out where you're like drinking, you're having fun? And most of us have experienced like drinking too much and just being like, oh, I'm like drunk. It's like you lay down and like all of a sudden you just the whole world starts spinning really fast and you're like, oh, I'm too turnt for that. But have you ever been, my real drinkers, my real alkies know this one, where you just like, and I barely even drink anymore, but it's so funny. I was thinking about my analogies. A couple months ago, it was a lot of war analogies. Then there was a lot of drug analogies. Yesterday, it was all casino and gambling analogies. Now we're going back to the drinking, partying ones. But the moon conjoining Neptune it's kind of like when you have that perfect amount of drinking, you like lay down and you're like, yeah, I'm buzzed. I'm feeling pretty good. But the moon conjoining Saturn, I think, is also like before we get to that point, it's just kind of knowing where the limitations are, kind of knowing like, okay, you're more like when the moon's in Pisces, it just reminds me of like you're much more influenced by your situation and the people around you. So for example, if you're, at a bar or like at a club or whatever, and it's like all of your friends are drinking, then they all take shots. So you take a shot and then they all get another round. So then you do that. And then before you know it, you're way too drunk. You're like, I didn't even want to get this drunk. The moon conjoining Saturn is good about being like, hey, I'm at least not going to do the shots, or at least I'm not going to do any drinks. I'm just going to like keep to my beer and keep to myself. But that moon conjoining Neptune, I think, is because again, the moon conjoins Saturn early Saturday or early Friday morning. So there is this kind of like, okay, I'm going to go into this with a little bit more of a sober mind. And then the moon conjoins Neptune and it kind of lets loose and it kind of has a little bit more fun. But then by Friday night, the moon does ingress into Aries. It's really super late Friday night. So we're just going to bring this up more on Saturday. So Saturday comes around, the moon, while it's in Aries, sextiles Jupiter. It then sextiles Pluto. And then it sextiles Venus, and then it conjoins the North Node. A lot of action on Saturday. I really like Saturday because while the moon's in Aries, we're feeling a little bit more charged up, wanting to take action, wanting to confront things, wanting to go. The moon's going to sextile Jupiter in Aries, or Jupiter in Gemini. So there's this level of like, I now have this new information, and now it's kind of making me want to do this. It's wanting me to do that. The moon will then sextile Pluto, where it's like, again, we're connecting a little bit more to that empowerment stuff that we felt a little bit more earlier on Monday. Then the moon sextiles Venus, where it's like, this is fun. This is exciting. I can be, involved in this and it's stimulating and I'm having just like a good time. And then the moon conjoins the North Node where you just want to keep going and going and going and going and just doing it more and more and more. Like, have you ever done something new for the first time? And like, let's say, I remember the first time, like this maybe isn't the best analogy, but when I was a kid, my mom, like, she just wanted me to do anything that wasn't hanging out with my meth head friends at the skate park and getting into shenanigans. And she just told me, she's like, why don't you go to the driving range? And I'm not a big golfer, even though I've got a bajillion golf clubs. And I went to the driving range, spent like $6 on like 10 billion balls. And me and my buddies we spent like hours out there just hitting it. Like we didn't want to play golf. We just wanted to hit the balls really far. And it was just a lot of fun. It was like, it was just one of those things where I wasn't expecting to have that much fun. And then we ended up just doing it for a lot longer than we anticipated. That's what Saturday reminds me of. So I think Saturday is really good for having fun, being open-minded. Like if you're, doing something new and you're not sure about, like, I think you're going to have a really good time. And I think you're probably going to do it a lot more than maybe you're anticipating. But then we get to Sunday, and Sunday actually has quite a few things to talk about. The moon will conjoin Chiron and Mars, number one. The highlight that I have written next, we're going to really go in detail probably last, but Venus is combust. When you look at the chart here, and Parker, if you could zoom in on this a little bit, Venus is at like 12 degrees just about, and the sun is about 12 degrees. It's not cazimi yet, which people get really too worked up on that word, but it's combust. It is on fire. Venus is not there. Then we also have Mercury sextiling Neptune, and then we have Jupiter trining Pluto. Quite a bit of things. The moon conjoining Chiron and Mars, I think, is bringing that back to the Mars-Chiron conjunction that we had on Wednesday. This is kind of like day 3 or day 4 after you kind of go through painful situation and you start to feel better. Like it's kind of like, okay, you're sick. You don't want to go to the doctor, but you get worse and worse and worse. You go to the doctor, they give you antibiotics, and it's like by day 3, day 4, you're not, shitting your pants or, throwing up all day long. You're like, okay, like I'm still a little bit weaker, but damn, I'm feeling a lot better. I'm really glad I took care of this problem. So take care of the problem on Wednesday. You'll probably feel a lot better by Sunday. Mercury sextiles Neptune, which again, I just really think is good for visualization, for ideas, for creativity. Mercury conjoins Uranus and sextiles Neptune, where it's like, I have this sudden insight of information. Now I know, like, what else can I do with it? Like, where else can I take it? What is the vision here? Where can I be a little bit more innovative with it? Now, I want to talk about Venus being combust because we don't have Venus actually going cazimi till next week. Ryan Butler, I brought this up, I think in the Mars video, but Ryan Butler, if you look up on YouTube, Medieval Astrology Guide, Ryan Butler is a phenomenal astrologer, and he has a whole video about, like, I think it's called combustion, cazimi, and synodic cycles, if I'm not mistaken, something along those lines. And it came out maybe about 6 months ago because he was talking about the Mars cazimi. And he just kind of talks about cazimi like may not be this actually great thing. And the reason being is what cazimi is when a planet formally conjoins the sun. But in astrology, it's like when a planet is really, really close to the sun, like Venus is right now, we call that combustion. It's like on fire. It's like untouchable. It's not working all that well. And then when the planet does go cazimi, it's purified, it's renewed, it starts a new life, and then it kind of continues combustion there for a minute until it leaves and separates from the sun. That's kind of where we're at with Venus. So Venus is about pleasure and fun and relationships and connections. And she's in Gemini, where it's kind of like, where is my social situation? Where is my connection? Where is my stimulation? And I just look at that as like, as Venus is getting closer and closer and closer to the sun, is like, maybe there is this kind of lack of connection. This kind of lack of fun. And maybe with Venus and Gemini and Jupiter and Gemini, it's like, that might be what's on our minds and on our hearts right now. But the reality of it, like, it may not be there. Maybe we have to have that Venus cazimi and let Venus and Jupiter separate from the sun to really kind of see what's going on here, to really see the impact of what we've been doing. And so I just look at Venus being super, super combust at this point is like, it kind of reminds me of like, I have Venus and Gemini, right? I have a sweet tooth. I can't, like, it's one of my issues. And there's certain points in time where I'm like, I just don't want a sweet. It's very, very rare. But that's what Venus and Gemini reminds me of, is like trying to like scratch an itch with a sweet, and it's just not hitting. It wasn't cooked in the right way. It wasn't made in the right way, and it's just not scratching the itch. That's what it reminds me of. Now, to talk about Jupiter trining Pluto. Jupiter trining Pluto is more of a meta thing. Jupiter trining Pluto, what to talk about here? Because here's the thing, I could talk a lot more about this in a geopolitical, more of a context. And it seems to me like it's more of a geopolitical context, more than it's going to be more personal stuff. That's where I feel like we're going to see the Jupiter Pluto stuff is going to be legislation, technology, all of that stuff coming down the pipeline, more so in 2025. Not exactly right now. Also, Edward Snowden stuff. I think you're going to see more and more of that come up as the year goes on. But on a more personal level, Jupiter and Gemini making that trine to Pluto, or that's more on a geopolitical level. More on a personal level, though, Jupiter in Gemini trining Pluto is, again, access to information that then leads to a relationship with power. It is a trine. So trine aspects are going to be more empowering. They are going to be better. They're in harmony with one another. So Jupiter and Gemini is accessing information. It might be a lot of information. It might not be like information that you can really kind of like sit on or at least kind of like process fully. But that Jupiter trine Pluto is like, okay, the information that I have that might make me question things is now actually allowing me access to a different perspective. One that either is kind of breaking down like veils and being like, okay, now I kind of see where my situation might be a little bit more worse, or where things are a little bit scary, or where things are a little bit more corrupt. Or this might be like, hey, I have access to this information that has now changed my beliefs about something. And it's actually kind of like both empowering and disempowering. And so it's kind of a funky thing. And I think we're going to see more and more of this as we get to next week, because there's so much Gemini stuff next week. Like the Jupiter trine Pluto is kind of like, boop, like it just kind of like nudges you, and then that kind of makes a cascade of like a domino effect. Because as we get into next week, listen to next week, guys. Mercury ingresses into Gemini. This is the ruler of Gemini. It really gets all this Gemini stuff gets activated once Mercury joins the chat. Mercury then also trines Pluto, where again, we're taking the bigger stuff and connecting it more to our heads. That's the Jupiter-Mercury relationship. Jupiter's like, here's all this stuff up here, and then Mercury brings it down to Earth. Then Mercury conjoins Jupiter. That's going to be a really big transit. Then we also have the Venus cazimi. Then we have the new moon in Gemini. So again, Gemini. Then we have Venus squaring Saturn, which is like, okay, I've overdone the sweets. That's going to be a big one. Mars ingresses into Taurus, Sun squares Saturn. Gosh, I meant to bring up Saturn and Mars and Taurus a second ago. But if you're still watching this, make sure you listen to this. Mars is only in Aries for another few more minutes. For this week and a little bit of next week. Mars goes into detriment next week. Mars is about fights, conflicts, energy and drive and ambition. That kind of goes away starting next week. So even though I know a lot of people have had just a lot going on over this past month, things really slow down with Mars and Taurus. You're going to have less energy to do it. Whatever, like Mars and Taurus is kind of like, Mars and Aries is like, I'm going to charge this, I'm going to charge that. Mars and Taurus is like, all right, we're not going to have all this energy, but what can we do more consistently with less energy? And I just want you to think about what are the things that you want to get done now before that ambitious energy goes away. Because I look at these Mars transits as like, this is kind of the last call for a good Mars transit. Mars will go through Taurus starting next month in June. And then it will, kind of do its thing. It will eventually conjoin Uranus. Then when Mars goes into Gemini, which is fun, it's going to conjoin Jupiter. It's then going to square Saturn. There's just like a lot of Mars stuff going on in July and August that is going to be frustrating. And then we have Mars in Cancer and its sign of fall. And then once we get, and that's going to be from what, September, October, November. November is when Mars goes into Leo. Yay, that's going to be fun. But then Mars goes retrograde for like, it's only going to go to 6 degrees Leo. Then it goes retrograde. Then it goes back into Cancer retrograde. And we don't really get a good Mars transit till May. Yeah, I think, May of 2025. So we have this is the last stop. It's going to be 11 months till we get like some good Mars stuff going on. Look at what Mars rules in your chart. Look at what Mars is like in your life and how your relationship is to it. I want you to take this opportunity this week to kind of like, hey, this is our last chance with a really, really strong and dignified Mars, really doing well and not really afflicted in any way. And then once we get to, June when Mars goes into Taurus, that's kind of it for a while. Like whatever you're starting now, like that's what you're dealing with. So start what you need to start now. Get done what you need to get done. Like, because what's cool about Mars and Taurus is that it keeps the ball rolling. It has momentum, but it only has momentum because there's no new momentum. There's no throttle or no gas getting put in here. All of that starts with Mars and Aries, and then Mars and Taurus is kind of coasting. So like, if you want to coast, like make sure you get that speed up right now. So anyway, that's what I got for you guys. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, comment below, let me know what you're excited for, what's going on, and I'll see you guys next week.